The Specter of Communism in Hawaii, 1947 to 1953. Chapter 1, The Stainback Battalion. On November 15, 1947, a letter appeared in the Honolulu Advertiser with an emotional response to a call for action. William H. George wrote, "I admire forthrightness, courage, conviction, whereas I despise pussyfooting, dodging, hedging, hiding out like a skunk in a hollow tree." Dr. Stanley D. Porteous, in his book on Pearl Harbor, has pointed out effectively to us what happens if the watchman shall see the sword come, and blow not the trumpet. Our watchman on the battlements is Governor Ingram M. Stainback, and he has already sounded the trumpet, and he will continue to sound it. But what if those who hear the trumpet do nothing about it? Their blood shall be on their own hands. The watchman is in the clear. Hereby I enroll in the Stainback Battalion, and am willing to stand up and be counted. Mr. George, a lifelong Republican, was responding to the Armistice Day declaration of war against communism in the territory of Hawaii made 4 days earlier by Governor Ingram M. Stainback, a lifelong Democrat. On the 29th anniversary of the end of World War I, scarcely 2 years after the end of World War II, Governor Stainback lashed out against the communist threat to our national security. "We are facing a struggle for the very survival of our nation," he told his audience at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific, Punch Bowl. "Totalitarianism in the form of communism is a threat to every democratic nation." Governor Stainback, originally appointed by Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1942, had been reappointed by President Truman in 1946. He served as governor until the spring of 1951, when Oren Elong was appointed to replace him. In spite of the fact that he had been in the territory since 1912, Stainback was still considered something of an outsider in Hawaiian politics. His road to power had been achieved in the National Democratic Party, not the local organization. In his anti-communism, Stainback reflected the current sentiment of the Truman administration, which equated capitalism with democracy and communism with allegiance to the Soviet Union, and had produced an elaborate set of loyalty procedures for federal employees in March 1947. It was the growing sentiment of the Cold War. Footnote: Truman made his decision to institute a permanent government employee loyalty program on March 22, 1947, just 10 days after his announcement of the Truman Doctrine before a joint session of Congress. For a discussion of this period, see Athanthea Horace's Seeds of Repression, Chicago, Quadrangle Books, 1971, especially Chapters 3, Rhetoric and Reality in Foreign Policy, and Chapter 5, The Quest for Absolute Security. Footnote end. In November 1947, the military establishment in Hawaii was in the process of screening 26,000 civilian employees of the Army and Navy. Governor Stainback, who had received his first warnings about the character of the communist threat in Hawaii from military intelligence, fully intended to do his part in purging the territorial government of any taint of communism. He made this very clear in his Armistice Day speech. "I know there are many of our citizens of these islands who refuse to see any menace to our nation in communism. Some of these people have gone to bed politically with the communists. Others are fellow travelers. Others are well-meaning people who decry as hysteria what they term as red baiting. Now, as I have warned you many times of the dangers of communism in the territory and of its active spread, I am going to read you just one paragraph from a plan of the communists under which they have operated in the territory for many years, which is devised particularly for the territory by one of its so-called brainiest leaders." As Governor Stainback indicated, he had warned the people of Hawaii about the dangers of communism on many occasions. Since his discovery of the menace in the early spring of 1947, the governor had sounded the alarm in speeches given on Navy Day, during Army Week, on the 4th of July, on Labor Day, and again as recently as October 24th, before a gathering of the American Federation of Labor, AFL. But in his Armistice Day speech, he offered something new, something beyond a general warning. He submitted what purported to be the communist plan for the territory, and though he did not mention the name of the author, he made it clear that he was at large among the people of the territory of Hawaii. The governor quoted from this document views that were certain to be offensive to much of the island's community. The title was "What Must We Do?" The goals were acceptable to liberal as well as radical elements in Hawaii, and should be set up and striven for as a means of arousing popular support. The governor quoted the following points from the document: anti-militarism, first attack ROTC in the high schools, then in the university, attack kowtowing to military in the local press and in public affairs, weaken the National Guard unit as much as possible and propagandize its members to make them sympathetic to unions, attack militarization of Boy Scouts, education, wide extension of educational opportunities, removal of all fees and rentals, aid to poor students, see Rex David, International Pamphlet number 39. No discrimination in placement of teachers. It is highly important to win the teachers, university and high school students. Civil rights. Aim at legislation abolishing repressive legislation, present laws against sedition, picketing and curbing foreign press, and legalizing strikes and picketing. Religion. As an immediate objective, take the Christian religion out of the public schools, showing how the other religions are discriminated against in a subtle manner by the use of Christian prayers, Easter, Thanksgiving, and Christmas exercises. The use of schools by Catholic priests, etc. Go on to attack the mission board for its use of ministers and workers to humilamali, a Hawaiian word meaning to placate, by the use of meaningless verbal massage plantation employees. Attack Roman Catholics for interference in public affairs, as in the attack upon sterilization bill. Attack Buddhists for keeping up Japanese chauvinism. Attack exploitation of Mormons by the Latter-day Saints Church. Taxation and social legislation. Work for change in incidence of taxation and outline a complete program of social legislation to be agitated for. Press. Arouse the public to the danger of a sugar-coated press. Governor Stainback concluded his speech with a request that all good citizens join him in the fight. He warned the listeners that the communists saw Hawaii as fertile ground for communism. He told them there were even communists in his territorial government. But, the governor assured his audience, I shall immediately take steps to unearth these activities that are going on in this territory and, where possible, expose and dismiss territorial employees who are involved. Hawaii was primed for some anti-communist action. The Board of Supervisors for the City and County of Honolulu, called the City Council since 1959, passed a resolution on October 28, 1947, calling for an investigation of communism in Hawaii. The resolution was sitting on the desk of Honolulu's Democratic Mayor John Wilson at the time Stainback was making his Armistice Day speech. Wilson, never one to be stampeded, ultimately refused to sign the resolution, though he did allow it to go into effect without his signature. The result, however, was no more than an expression of the sentiment of the Board of Supervisors. The American Legion was quick to praise Stainback's speech and called upon the governor to disclose the names of all communists working in the territorial government. The Legion quickly came up with its own answer to the problem of investigating communism in Hawaii. A.F. Wallace, chairman of the Americanism Committee of the American Legion, Department of Hawaii, met with the territory's delegate to the United States Congress, Joseph R. Farrington, who was also a member of the Legion. The delegate subsequently requested that United States Attorney General Tom Clark fully cooperate with the American Legion in their proposed investigation. The Honolulu Chamber of Commerce and the American Federation of Labor quickly supported Farrington in endorsing the American Legion as the proper agency to carry out a red probe in Hawaii. The American Legion's offer had a short life. Tom Clark was not willing to open FBI files for the Legion and, besides, Governor Stainback had plans of his own. The Territorial Attorney General's office had been investigating communism in the area for nearly half a year. The first results of their effort came to light quickly. On November 25, 1947, Dr. John E. Rienecke, a teacher at Farrington High School, and his wife, Aiko, a teacher at Whaley Elementary School, were suspended from their teaching positions without pay. Dr. Rienecke had 17 years of teaching experience in the territory of Hawaii, and his wife had 20. The announcement was made by Dr. W. Harold Loper, Superintendent of Public Instruction for the territory of Hawaii. Dr. Loper also announced that December 18, 1947 had been set as the date for a hearing on the charges against the Rieneckes. The hearing was to be held by the Territorial Commissioners of Public Instruction. The charges, as summarized by the Honolulu Advertiser, were as follows. 1. They are members, and have been for many years, of a secret, underground organization or society existing in the territory of Hawaii calling itself the Communist Party. 2. Said secret society has existed in the territory unlawfully without a license, contrary to the provisions of Chapter 281 of the revised laws. 3. The Communist Party in the territory follows a course of action that will be beneficial to the interests of the Communist Party of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. 4. The policies of the Communist Party are the antithesis of and opposed to the principles of democracy. 5. Said secret society is undemocratic. Some of the practices advocated by this secret society and some of its activities are highly dishonorable and reprehensible. 6. The membership of Dr. and Mrs. Rienecke in the Communist Party has been exposed and publicized in the community, bringing them into disrepute and causing them to lose the trust and confidence of the community. 7. By reason of their membership in the Communist Party, the conduct of the two teachers has not been exemplary. Eighth, as members of said secret society, they are not possessed of the ideals of democracy. 9. As members of said secret organization, they do not bear undivided allegiance to the government of the United States. 10. Because of their membership in the Communist Party, there is reasonable doubt as to their loyalty to the United States. 11. Their continued employment as school teachers will bring great odium and disrepute upon the Department of Public Instruction. Their dismissal from service will be for the benefit of the Department of Public Instruction. The initial response to the charges came from the Reinecke's legal counsel, Harriet Bauslog. Footnote: Attorney Bauslog originally came to Hawaii prior to World War II with her husband, an instructor at the University of Hawaii. She had attended law school at the University of Indiana and was licensed to practice law in the states of Indiana and Massachusetts. While studying for the bar examination in the territory of Hawaii, she did legal research for the Big Five law firm of Stanley, Vidasek, Pratt and Wynn. Bauslog passed the bar in December 1941, just before the closure of civil courts following the attack on Pearl Harbor. During the war, she went to Washington, D.C., where she worked for the War Labor Board. Her position brought her into contact with many of the top labor leaders in the U.S., including Harry Bridges, the president of the ILWU. In 1944, Bauslog left the War Labor Board and became the ILWU's Washington representative on the CIO Maritime Committee. In October 1946, after the start of the ILWU sugar strike in Hawaii, Bauslog was brought to Hawaii along with Meyer Simmons, a lawyer with the San Francisco firm of Gladstein, Anderson, Risner and Sawyer, the ILWU's West Coast law firm. Simmons was not yet a member of the Hawaii Bar and had to wait a year before he could practice in Hawaii's courts. This was during the time of the Loyalty Oath, and Simmons' membership in the National Lawyers Guild, which was on the Attorney General's list, delayed his admittance to the bar until 1948. The law firm of Bauslog and Simmons became intimately associated with not only the ILWU but also with the political left in general. They earned a well-deserved reputation as champions of the underdog and as the implacable foes of the Big Five, an interesting irony considering Bauslog's earlier association with the law firm of Stanley, Vidasek, Pratt and Wynn. This information was obtained from an interview with Harriet Bauslog on June 14, 1973. Footnote end. The suspension of Mr. and Mrs. Reinecke, she charged, is not only prejudicial to them, but is a denial of accepted standards of due process of law. Calling the suspension tantamount to conviction, Bauslog threw out a series of demands relative to the hearing which was scheduled for December 18. First, she demanded that the Rieneckes be allowed to plead their case before a body which was not already prejudiced against them. This meant a group other than the Commissioners of Public Instruction. Second, the hearings should be public. Third, the names and addresses of all witnesses against the Rieneckes be provided within 5 days. Fourth, all documents and other exhibits to be used as evidence against the Rieneckes be made available to the defense within 5 days. Fifth, the defense be allowed to subpoena witnesses. And finally, defense counsel be notified within 5 days of the rules of evidence to be utilized during the hearing. Territorial Attorney General Walter D. Ackerman, in a letter which read like a lecture in administrative law, dismissed Bauslog's demands as being without support in law. But if the Attorney General was ready for Bauslog's first salvo, he was not prepared for her second. 2 days after her original demands, Bauslog offered Ackerman a legal lesson of her own. My clients are charged with violating a criminal law of the territory prohibiting secret societies, a law which is unconstitutional on its face. If the governor, the attorney general, or the superintendent of public instruction believe that this law is valid and that Dr. and Mrs. Reinecke have violated it, then these officials are duty-bound to turn over evidence to the proper prosecuting officials. The place to try criminal charges is in the regularly established courts with the customary safeguards of the criminal law. Bauslog's reference to criminal law was directed at a rarely used secret association statute dating back to 1884. It had somehow found its way into Chapter 281 of the Revised Laws of Hawaii, 1945. Its inclusion in the charges against the Rieneckes created a constitutional question which, in the eyes of federal Judge Delbert E. Metzger, had sufficient merit to be presented before a 3-judge federal court. Hasty efforts to amend the charges, deleting the reference to the criminal code, were unsuccessful and the territory's plans for a December 18th hearing were dashed. It would be 8 months before the hearings finally began. Dr. Reinecke, now exposed as the mastermind behind the communist masterplan in Hawaii, was quickly named as a leading member of the Communist Party in Hawaii in a pamphlet alleged to have been written by a former communist by the name of Akiro Izuka. The pamphlet was issued on November 15, 1947, just 4 days after Governor Stainback's speech. Reinecke's first public response appeared in the newspaper on November 29. and is of sufficient interest to present here in its entirety. The charges against Mrs. Rienecke and myself amount to this, that we are not possessed of the ideals of democracy, and that we do not bear undivided allegiance to the government of the United States. The facts of our lives are to the contrary. In our hearings before the Commissioners of Public Instruction, we are prepared to prove both our good reputation as teachers and also our active devotion to the ideals of democracy. Mrs. Rienecke and I have never made any secret of our political views. We are ready to state them in public for the edification of the Attorney General, as in the past we have always been willing to state them in private conversations and letters to the local newspapers. Through our civic activities since 1927, we have constantly upheld the fundamentals of American democracy, political, economic, and racial. It is just because we have worked openly for our beliefs and perhaps more actively than most well-minded citizens that we have incurred enmity and have been singled out to bear the first blows of a purge that is political in purpose. Although we are called undemocratic, no single instance of undemocratic conduct is stated, nor can any be found. These charges against us include the statement that our supposed membership in the Communist Party has been exposed and publicized in the community. This exposure comes from the governor's Armistice Day speech and from a recent pamphlet that names us as communists, and attacks Delegate Joseph R. Farrington as a tool of the Communist Party. The political issues are greater in importance than our two jobs. In these two publications, the speech of the governor and the pamphlet, the final political aims lie right on the surface. It is no accidental matter that the pamphlet appeared immediately after the governor's speech was made, nor is it a coincidence that both the speech and the pamphlet are now in heavy use to prejudice visiting members of Congress against statehood. It is probable that our hearing will be of value to the community. If the hearing is held in a fair and judicial manner, we have complete confidence that we shall be teachers in the public schools for another 20 years. Governor Stainback was clearly not interested in the facts of the Rienecke's lives. He was concerned with one fact, and one fact alone. Mr. Rienecke, the governor wrote in response to the school teacher's press statement, carefully sidestepped the only question, is he or is he not an enrolled communist? Instead of answering this question, he says that the charges against him are a plot by me against statehood. Quite the contrary, it is obvious that the greatest service I can render statehood will be to clean the communists out of our territorial government and certain local labor unions. In this rather revealing statement, Governor Stainback was hinting at what he would shortly make more explicit when he stated that the investigation of communism by the territory was primarily for the purpose of setting a good example for the ILWU so that Union might clean its own house. In another statement, the governor indicated that he was simply trying to follow the lead of the Truman administration in the area of loyalty procedures. This certainly was one of the governor's motivations, being an appointee of the President of the United States. The establishment of loyalty procedures by the Truman administration in the spring of 1947 corresponded almost exactly with the first revelations about communism in Hawaii that the governor had received from military intelligence. Stainback had developed a fairly friendly relationship with labor during his early years as governor. He had, as a matter of fact, appointed such ILWU leaders as Jack Kawano and Jack Hall to public commissions. Now the names of Kawano and Hall were coming before the governor as members of the Communist Party in Hawaii. This embarrassment to the governor undoubtedly confirmed him in his present course, a course which was a public demonstration of his own loyalty and patriotism. There were many, besides the governor, who wanted a straight answer from Rienecke to the question, "Are you a communist?" When asked this question directly by a reporter from the Honolulu Star-Bulletin, Rienecke replied, "It is very well known that I share a number of opinions with the communists, but that doesn't say I am one." The reporter persisted, "Then are you denying that you are a communist?" Rienecke refused to answer directly, saying that he had been smeared with the label so often that he did not see any point in talking about it. The Honolulu Advertiser was quite clear about its view of the constitutional rights of a man who is charged with being a communist. Persons under investigation should not, the paper editorialized, be allowed to take refuge in silence. Only the day before, the Advertiser had printed a column by the fire-breathing columnist Westbrook Pegler which seemed to capture very well the editorial feeling of Honolulu's morning daily with regard to American communists. When Congress asks a man whether he is a communist, Pegler wrote, referring to the House Committee on Un-American Activities, the question actually means, are you a sworn enemy of the United States? Governor Stainback was by no means alone in the community in speaking out against the communist menace. The Advertiser had been carrying on a steady anti-communist campaign since 1946. As a matter of fact, the Advertiser had been critical of Governor Stainback himself for not speaking out against the Congress of Industrial Organizations Political Action Committee, an organization considered by the Advertiser to be a communist front. Footnote: this organization will appear in this work abbreviated in various forms. Often referred to as the CIO PAC, it was more commonly referred to simply as the PAC. Since the ILWU was the dominant CIO union in Hawaii, the abbreviation ILWU PAC was also used. However designated, the PAC was founded by CIO leaders, particularly Sidney Hillman, after the Democratic losses in the 1942 congressional elections. The PAC had a significant impact upon national politics in the elections of 1944 and 1946, but by 1948 the interest of the left had shifted to Henry Wallace's Progressive Party, and the CIO was deeply locked in a struggle to purge the Union of its communist elements. Footnote end. Stainback could also be assured of support in the business community. In a speech given before the Hawaiian sugar technologists, shortly after Governor Stainback's Armistice Day speech, Philip Spaulding, president of C. Brewer & Co., Limited, one of the Big Five firms, warned 300 assembled members, "Our own communists are endeavoring in every way to keep production down and achieve personal success on a foundation of chaos and misery." From December 28, 1947 through January 2, 1948, the Advertiser published a series of articles by attorney Alfred L. Castle, a missionary descendant intimately related to the Big Five, entitled "There Can Be No Compromise with Communism." Nor was the Stainback Battalion restricted to the territory of Hawaii. The governor's papers contain extensive correspondence with the virulently anti-communist labor writer, Victor Riesel. One letter from Riesel to Stainback is particularly revealing. It is dated March 25, 1948, and Riesel writes, "You will remember that some time ago you were good enough to send me some information on communist activities in your territory. I used this to very salutary advantage when I found that none of it was known here in the United States. I passed some information on to Lieutenant Governor Arthur W. Coolidge of Massachusetts, and, as I gather it, he contacted you." In a speech subsequently delivered by Mr. Coolidge, he discussed a set of instructions issued by the Communist Party to its agents, and he said that he had received these documents from you. "I wonder if I couldn't get a photostatic set. My outlets now are in 102 cities, and we can do some good in telling the story." The reference to Lieutenant Governor Coolidge dealt with a speech he made in Quincy, Massachusetts, on February 24, 1948. There is a letter in the Stainback papers from Coolidge to Stainback dated December 17, 1947, requesting information on communist infiltration in Hawaii and on the rumor that the Reds planned to stage a general strike in your territory in February. In his reply, dated February 11, 1948, Stainback told Coolidge, "Communism has made great headway in the territory, particularly in some of our labor organizations. The ILWU is completely dominated by the communists. We also have some in our university and among our school teachers. I am enclosing a copy of an article written by one of the communists entitled 'What Must We Do?'" Stainback added that his recent exposure of the communist threat in Hawaii had averted the general strike which had been threatened. Footnote: the author is unable to determine what, if anything in specific, Coolidge had in mind when he first mentioned a general strike scheduled for February 1948. Certainly, there was no open discussion of one, and nobody with whom the author has spoken knows of any such event in the planning. Footnote end. Lieutenant Governor Coolidge sent Stainback a copy of the Quincy speech in which he declared, "I have in my possession a photostat copy of orders issued by the Communist Party, outlining a program to make Hawaii the most completely communist area under the stars and stripes. This document was sent to me by the Governor of Hawaii, Ingram M. Stainback." In time, Stainback found that he needed to take a less conspicuous role in his anti-communist crusade. When Victor Riesel asked Stainback to appear as a guest columnist in his space in the spring of 1948, the governor declined, saying, "I find that discussion of communism in the islands has been a rather ticklish proposition, as so many of our advocates of statehood seem to try to conceal its presence here and are very resentful of any disclosures or comments. However, I plan to discuss the whole problem with Washington authorities and hope to get the green light." There is additional evidence in the governor's papers that he provided information to Senator Pat McCarran, who was a staunch anti-communist and opponent of Hawaiian statehood. McCarran visited Hawaii in November 1947, and upon returning to the mainland, he told a Los Angeles reporter, "I told them to clean out their communists. Some of their union leaders, high on the executive councils, are communists. They aim to make it a red outpost, just as they would like to do with Cuba." Governor Stainback also played a role in bringing Jack B. Tenney, chairman of the California Senate Fact-Finding Committee on Un-American Activities, to Hawaii in 1949. He made the arrangements for Tenney to speak before the territorial legislature with the help of Senator William C. Doc Hill, a fiercely anti-communist Republican from the island of Hawaii. Stainback also sent two of his assistant attorneys general, William Blatt and Robert Griffith, to a work session on communism in San Francisco, which was organized by the National Americanism Committee on the recommendation of Jack Tenney. Despite facing criticism from those who resented the disunity he created in his own party and those who felt that the governor's approach was a serious hindrance to Hawaiian statehood, Stainback maintained his strong anti-communist views. However, he was never able to capture the public's imagination as the leader of an anti-communist crusade, and the Stainback Battalion was never more than a small group,